That's the market for you. So we thought of getting you a special voice, slightly on the broader range of issues. We have got a partner at McKinsey, Shirish, joining us on my show today to have a very special discussion. The recent note coming from McKinsey's side that India is in a decadal turning point right now, and which sectors will grow, what are the challenges we are likely to fear, and the focus areas apart from the latest round of reforms on the agri-bill side. All of that is planned up. Shirish, first of all, I'd like to thank you for joining us on the show today. Always great to have McKinsey Insights on our channel. Let's start by understanding the main hypothesis you're making that India is actually at a turning point. Despite of whatever is happening in the environment, there is hope which lies ahead. What's the hypothesis?
Yeah, we really think that India is a decadal turning point, and how the next decade unfolds is really up to us. And therefore, we took almost a year to write this particular report. Even before COVID uncertainties, you know that Indian economy was slowing down. The GDP had slowed down to 4.2%. NPAs have gone from 3 to 9%. Exports have dropped from 25 to 19%. So there were dark clouds on the horizon even before COVID. And therefore, the COVID had, of course, added more uncertainties to this. So the reason for this report is to say, can India really get on a high growth path? And the reason for this high growth path is that India needs to add around 90 million non-farm jobs in the next decade. And if you say that up to 2023, suppose the COVID impact is there, then in 7 years, around 90 million jobs means around 12 million jobs a year. Compare that to only around 4 million job creation in the last 6 years before COVID. So it's triple the job. And what we also found out that means around 8 to 8.5% GDP growth rate. So creation of 90 million jobs and 8 to 8.5% GDP growth rate is the imperative, is the clarion call for the Indian economy. Of course, with COVID, it seems uncertain, but we think that this is perhaps a time to really embark on a set of measures and reforms that can take us to that type of growth rate 2023 onwards. Okay, so that was the reason for this report. And by the way, India has done this before. If you see that between 2000 and 2010, India did grow at 7.25%, employment growth was 1.3%, and so on. So India has done it before, and we think that if we take a set of steps, India can do it again.
Shirish, before all of that, it's also important to take stock of where things are right now. We are clearly limping back from the throes of a worst pandemic the world has ever seen. How are you observing the shape of the recovery which is taking place?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it has a lot of uncertainties around it. Okay, and I don't have a perfect crystal ball to say what type of recovery, but we have a few points here. In the report, we have said that, even this year, the Indian economy could contract somewhere between -3 to -9%. We think that it will be probably closer to the -9%. And that is something that not much can be done about. Okay, so that's one. Our sense is that recovery will, of course, start. And sometime during the next financial year, perhaps Q2 of next financial year, is when we will start coming back to normal. That means we'll start having the same type of GDP and GDP growth rate as we had pre-COVID, right? But different sectors will go through different types of recoveries. All the way to the bottom will be perhaps, recreation, logistics, airlines, hotels, and so on, which we call almost like a L-shaped recovery, slow, muted. And all the way to the top, it will be sectors like essential consumer goods and agriculture, okay, which have not actually got affected too much and go to and recover or not recover much faster, right? And so on. So different sectors of the economy will recover differently, but our sense is that it will take the middle of next financial year to come back to some type of normality.
The objective of these bills according to them. We will talk about all of that with Shirish as well, but Shirish is still with us over here. Shirish, thank you very much for patiently waiting by Prime Minister Modi's commentary coming in. But we were talking about sectors. Which sectors do you think are looking promising right now? Which are the ones which will actually see tailwinds because of the COVID? And there are some of them. And which are the ones which will languish for some time, in your view?
That's a very good question. We actually debated, discussed, and analyzed this a lot. And I'll tell you some of the things that came out of our analysis. We tried to see whether we can depend just on services, right? Many people say that India should go directly from agriculture to services. So we looked at that. And the conclusion that we reached that while services very, very important, they have to grow at 9 to 10%, but it's not enough, right? The sectors that really need to amplify the most are construction and manufacturing. I'll start with 30 seconds on construction. Construction, when we projected up to 2030, was supposed to create almost 24 million new jobs, new non-farm jobs, from the 90 million non-farm jobs that I spoke about. So 1 in 4 jobs have to come from construction. And construction includes both real estate as well as infrastructure. And the second sector, which we debated a lot, discussed a lot, was manufacturing. This decade is perhaps the last decade when we can get our manufacturing act together. Manufacturing not only will add 11 million non-farm jobs, but 1 in 5, $750 billion of GDP, additional GDP could come from manufacturing. So both manufacturing and construction, job-wise, were quite important. And because of the general state of economy and what stage we are at, agriculture will shed around 30 million jobs. So therefore, manufacturing and construction need to amplify the most in this part and in this decade.
Let's look at agriculture a little more closely as a contributor in your view. Agri bill and the passages all over the town, the jury is still divided. But Prime Minister Modi just a while back was talking about the benefits it will accrue as far as the farming community is concerned. What have you looked into or analyzed the way things are progressing on the agri side?
Yeah, I would specifically speak on agriculture. But what we did in the report are we have come up with 43 frontier business opportunities, okay, some very, very large business opportunity. And agriculture is probably one of the top 5, one of the top 6 in there.
Sure.
So what we looked at is really agriculture is not just farming, but it's, as you said, the agro-processing part. India has the potential to go to almost $100 billion of agricultural exports. Today, it's around 30. So it's 3x. And this is in areas like fruits, vegetables, aquaculture, livestock, and so on. Okay, so agricultural export opportunities are actually enormous, right? So from that way, it's one of our major frontier business opportunities. So therefore, as we look at the reforms required, and the good news is that some of the reforms that we had mentioned in the report, the government has already announced, including the APMC Act relaxation, the Essential Commodities Act relaxation, ability of the farmers to directly go to end consumers, very, very important. On top of that, a substantial infrastructure investment, and a lot of that can be done by the private sector, whether it's in cold chain and so on, is required, and that can perhaps be catalyzed. And also precision agriculture, that really increases the yields per hectare is the second need of the day. So overall, I would say that agriculture will have important role to play, especially agro-processing in exports as well as domestic consumption. And some of the reforms that the government have announced, I think, is a step in the right direction.
Lastly, Shirish, also how are you analyzing the role of various kinds of companies in your report, large and small, all kinds of companies. Small ones are badly hit. Access to capital is an issue for them. Large ones are relatively chugging along. trying to become much more efficient, and also the kind of help which is required to the small and SME side of the corporates?
I completely agree that this has been a particularly difficult time for small and medium-sized companies. Okay, and from that perspective, any policy response, especially towards credit guarantees and so on, have to be done. Okay. In our report, we looked at slightly longer-term horizon, and also we compared the Indian corporate overall landscape to many other peer economies, as we said. And we were surprised to find out, okay, and I'll come to the medium and small size companies, but we were surprised to find out that the number of large and medium sized companies that the Indian economy requires are simply not there. Just to give an example, on the large company side, most of our peer economies have 70% of the GDP are the revenues of the large companies. We are only at 48%. Okay. Similarly, generally at this scale of the economy, India should have almost 1,800 large companies. And the reason for large companies is not just because large have to be there, but it's because large companies, for example, are 40% of our exports. Okay. They are 11 times more productive than the economy as a whole. So that they give the boost that is required. Okay, so therefore we need 3 times the number of large companies. But when we started looking at why is this so, the answer came out to be actually in the lack of companies in medium and small size. Okay, so India has what we call is the missing middle. India needs another 1,000 mid-sized companies to become large and 10,000 small companies to become mid-sized. Okay, so that ladder has to be climbed. When we started looking deeper into what's stopping them, is exactly what you said, which is really lack of access to capital and substantial difficulty in doing business, which is lack of ease of doing business. But important for India to climb the ladder of scale for small and medium-sized companies so that we can be the job creators, the productivity enhancers that India sorely needs.
All right, Shirish, I'm afraid we'll have to wrap up over here. Completely running short on time here, but really enjoyed chatting with you today with the inputs that you've given on the show. That was Shirish Sankhe of McKinsey talking about why India is in a turning point, which sectors look good, what all challenges we need to overcome to really go ahead in the high growth path once again. And